Hello, Kabir. Welcome to the special episode on COGS. We're expected to know from you on the detailed trajectories of the war and the situations, fast developing situations in Middle East. So if you could help us to understand what is the trajectory of the war. Kabir, you mentioned about the border. So do you think the other borders, except where the escalation took place, do you think they are all are well demarcated and well defined?
No, absolutely not. And it's not just about the borders with Gaza or the positioning of West Bank. It is also Golan Heights. There are multiple locations. You know, the Balfour Declaration did not do anyone any favors. We are almost 110 years in now. To that declaration being signed as part of a colonial disengagement, and ultimately, this answers are still being sought to that declaration's deliverables. Right now, the problem is that the countries that, whether it's Britain or France, that were involved at that point of time are nowhere to be found now. I mean, it's been a long period of time, and it's been given to these regional entities and Israel and Palestine to resolve it amongst themselves, which I really don't see happening anytime soon. The demarcation of the geographic boundaries and borders is something that can only be done through a course of dialogue, pushed by the international community, and this is not the correct time, I think, for that to happen. There are more fundamental issues, which is, of course, a ceasefire and a stop of hostilities, a defanging of groups like Hamas, and a bigger question of what a political entity representing the Palestinians can come up, which can actually have a more positive impact moving forward, rather than taking a militant or a more aggressive approach to things. And similar questions are there within Israel as well. Ultimately, yes, you have decapitated Hezbollah, you have decapitated Hamas. Does that end the hostilities against Israel? Probably not. So it's a stalemate as far as the broader connotations of the war is concerned. In the short form, a lot of what we are seeing right now is based on revenge, and a requirement in Israel to bring back a level of deterrence that they have lost over the past 1 year.
How do you look at the evolving strategy of Hamas and Hezbollah? Do you think they have a strategic depth or they have some sort of tactical advantage?
Look, Hamas probably not right now. Let's be honest. The killing of Yahya Sinwar was a very, very big moment for Hamas. They have been depleted militarily in Gaza, at least, and rebuilding in a small geography like Gaza, which is not really surrounded by much as far as geographic depth is concerned, is not going to be easy. So for Hamas, it's going to be extremely difficult to come back in the same shape and form as it existed previously. Hezbollah is a very different entity. Hezbollah is much more aligned with the Iranians than Hamas was. You have to remember that Hamas was a Sunni organization, while Hezbollah is a Shia organization.
Mostly.
Yeah, mostly. But they have, Hezbollah was much more directly built, supported, and incubated by the Iranians than Hamas was. Hamas was more of a marriage of convenience at that point of time. The Iranians used the issue of Palestine and support with Hamas by basically saying that, look, we are actually not promoting or fighting on sectarian lines. We are fighting for Islam and we are fighting for all Muslims. Unlike, let's say, Saudis or the Emiratis, who are taking a much more pro-Western, much more neutral, or trying to remain neutral and not getting into it, not challenging Israel directly. The Emiratis haven't, exited the Abraham Accords or something. And okay, fine. The Saudis have now said that we will not normalize with Israel unless there is a two-state solution conversation on the table, at least. But the fact that the Emiratis have not done that is a significant thing. So the Iranians have used this basically to mobilize support for themselves. There were certain polls, if I remember correctly, reported in either Al Arabiya or Arab News, that said that even populations in the Arab world see Iran a little bit more favorably, that they are supporting the Palestinians and we are not doing anything. And that's a concern the Arab powerhouses have, that we don't want the street to turn against us and suddenly start seeing Iran as the messiah of sorts for Muslims. So, it's that's where a lot of these groups can find space, right? Especially Hezbollah, which despite its decapitations as well, Hassan Nasrallah is killed, Saifuddin was also killed. Now we have Naim Qasim who's taken over, and I'm not sure how long he will survive or not survive. But institutionally, Hezbollah has direct support with the Iranians, right? So their survivability is still at some level guaranteed, right? Especially politically inside Lebanon, unless the Lebanese themselves decide that we need to eject Hezbollah. Because of them, we are facing so much trouble. Unless that happens, I'm not going. At least Hezbollah is in a fairly, if not safe but stable condition. Hamas is going to have a big problem in trying to recuperate from the amount of losses they have taken.
Do you think is there any alternative to the two states theories? Something has emerged in over the decades.
It's a very interesting question. Again, with all that is happening, we are also commemorating the Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, who was shot and killed years ago around this time when he sort of pushed for a two-state solution.
Yeah, we're observing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it's on paper at least, I don't think there is anything more viable than a two-state solution, because the alternative to the two-state solution is a continuation of hostilities between the Muslim population and the Jewish population. Now, the problem is that I don't think either the Palestinian political entities, whether that is the political wing of Hamas or whether that is the political wing of Fatah or any of such organizations, and the Israeli political systems agree on a two-state solution. I think that is very odd commonality they have amongst each other, that a two-state solution is not going to really resolve anything. If you see the literature that Hamas has released over the past couple of years, they show the entire Israeli territory as part of Palestine. So that automatically means that even if there is a two-state solution, there is no guarantee that the war per se is going to stop. And if the war doesn't stop, then the viability of the two-state solution itself is questionable, because the main aim would be to stop hostilities between these two populations. So on paper, I think a lot of countries support the two-state solution, including India, because that is the only option really available from a distance. But for entities such as Israel or such as Palestine that are involved in this directly, they have a very different take on these things. So everyone supporting the two-state solution is, in my opinion, doing so because of lack of alternatives.
Is there a unity in Middle East, or it lacks? There's a differences in the collective, in forming collective interest.
I think there is a unity there is unity to sort of, at least in the Gulf states, to make sure that there is no spillover of the conflict. There is a unity there. I mean, the Emiratis can have a different view of what is happening. The Saudis can have a different view of what is happening. But both of them would not want a military conflict to land on their soil, right? We are, see, the UAE is a very good example. Look at the geography of the UAE. And its positioning in the world. The Dubai and Abu Dhabi are coming up as global financial hubs, global economic centers of trade, and so on and so forth. One attack or one wayward missile landing in Dubai can end that story, right? The businesses will get spooked. They will say the security is deteriorated. It's not the same what we were expecting after Abraham Accords and the normalization processes and stuff. It's much safer to go back to the Singapores and the Hong Kongs and the Londons and Paris than to come to Dubai. And their entire growth story is based on this, right? They don't have a huge manufacturing base. They don't even have huge geographic depth. It's based on services. It's based on finance. It's based on stability, offering big business to come there and do their business openly with the Russians, with the Americans, with the Chinese, with everyone. If the war escalates, if the war spills over, that story is in big trouble. UAE is already reaping benefits of that story. The Saudis haven't even started yet. The Saudis are still making a move towards that kind of story. They want Riyadh to be a global financial capital. They want Neom City, which is a new city coming up on the Red Sea, to be the future of trade and economics in the region. All that is yet to come. Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 is still 4-5 years away. So they're very, very worried about that, which is why we are seeing a lot of engagement with the Iranians. The Iranian foreign minister went to Saudi Arabia, and MBS met him directly. Protocol-wise, he's supposed to meet just the foreign minister, but the fact that the Crown Prince came and met him himself shows the importance of making sure in Saudi Arabia that this does not come on their shores. So that is a core concern for these countries right now. That's the unity there, that we don't want this to escalate beyond a point, and for that we are okay with engaging with the Iranians also, despite significant differences between Riyadh and Tehran.
Most of the MNCs, several at least the biggies, have their footprint in the, not just footprint, but they have a influential position in the Middle Eastern capital and the NAB centers like Dubai.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how this war will affect the businesses, not just the MNCs, but also the other businesses which are present in the other countries, not necessarily the MNCs.
The businesses are being inadvertently affected already, right? Now, a lot of the MNCs, let's say, that work in finance sector may not be impacted right now. But for example, let me put two examples up front. The number of corridors that airlines use to come in and out of the Middle East from Europe and America have shrunk significantly. They avoid flying over Iraq. They avoid flying over Syria. They now avoid flying over Iran. That leaves very little space for these flights to safely navigate
civilian land space.
Yeah, exactly, civilian landscape. And for the UAE, again, airlines like Emirates, that's a critical tool of economics, right? So they are already navigating that. The prices for tickets have gone up, and if if the condition spirals, people will stop traveling. It's very simple, or they'll take alternatives, right? They will not go to Dubai, which is a global hub for transit right now. That is one. The second is, for example, the Red Sea, right? The Houthi attacks over the past 1 year have actually diverted trade worth $100 to $150 billion already. Big companies like Maersk are not using the Red Sea anymore. They take the longer route of the African coast around the Cape of Good Hope and then come up, right? So already the Houthis have managed, which was a ragtag organization till 2 years ago, have managed to divert $150 billion worth of trade by just attacking ships with crude weapons. They don't have very sophisticated weapons, right? So roughly $150 to $200 billion of trade has already left the region. Right, so that is in the long term really not affordable for anyone in any economy in the region. Right, Egypt has already said they've lost $8 billion in fees for ships using the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is absolutely critical to the Egyptian economy. It connects Asia to Europe as the shortest route possible. The fact that companies are using the longer route, which is because it's deemed more safe, and they are easily requirements from insurance companies says that take routes even if they're longer but less risky. They have to follow that, right? So a country like Egypt, which is already struggling, or losing $8 billion in 1 year, is not sustainable, right? So there's already significant economic loss that we are not seeing on the surface. But it is impacting the vision of the region being a very stable environment for all global trade to converge. And I think countries like UAE, countries like Saudi, and countries like Israel, which would want a return of some sort of normalcy as quickly as possible, so that the trade can return and some sort of normalcy can prevail.
Do you think the role of UN in Middle East will be redefined and restructured?
I don't think it will be completely restructured, because Israel by itself cannot do it, right? Israel is not the only country in the Middle East as where the UN resides.
Functions.
Yeah. See, the UN is a very contested organization today, as we know, right? But the problem with the UN is twofold, and I think where people conflate the failures of the UN to the successes of the UN. Right now, the main failure of the UN resides with the Security Council. The fact that they're unable to either stop wars or mediate enough that they come to quick resolution of wars is the main failure of the Security Council. Which is why, you know, countries like India have been saying you need to expand the Security Council, you need to get newer realities to it. You need to get countries like India in, you need to get countries from Africa in, you need to get countries even like Germany or Japan in, both of them who are not part of it, to reflect the newer realities of the global geopolitical spectrum. So that's where the failure lies. Now, let me just say, some of the most important work done by the UN is done by its smaller agencies, whether it's UNICEF, whether it's the food programs, whether it's the aid programs. We don't see it on a daily basis, but they are one of the very few organizations that consistently and regularly supply aid to war-torn areas, right? They supply, and why they are more successful than others, let's say whether it's the Red Crescent or the Red Cross and so on, is because majority of the countries where these conflicts are happening are members of the UN, and they have obligations to allow the UN to deliver relief material, right, and deliver it safely. Now, that, you know, is still a very important role that the UN fulfills. It is the only organization that can reach these areas, these populations. Otherwise, they will have absolutely nothing to look forward to.
So do you think UN has the same equation with local authorities and administration that makes the compliance?
No, I don't think so. It's not about equations. I think local authorities and local, governates, or however it is, they have to work with the UN, because otherwise, let's say in any conflict zone in Africa, for example, the locals have, or even the local militia sometimes have to work with the UN, because if their population starve and die, they will have no public support in any shape or form, right? So whether it's detrimental to them or it actually works for them, the core aim of these UN agencies is to deliver aid. It's not to politically, try to reshape a conflict or to politically try to reshape realities. It's to just deliver basic necessities to a suffering population. And I think that is an important job that UN agencies do. And if that is, let's say, dismantled, then the number of civilians and people around the world, not just in the Middle East, but in Africa, in Asia and so on, who will be on the suffering end of things, will drastically increase. So we have to see the failures, where the failures have taken place in the UN, which is the Security Council, which is its inability, and it's it's the fact that it has not kept up with times to stop conflicts or to mediate conflicts successfully, compared to the agencies that the UN runs, that delivers critical aid to a lot of the suffering populations around the world without having major political mandates to it. So those two things need to be taken into consideration separately when we are talking about the realities of the UN and the failures of the UN or the successes of the UN. Instead of I think that's where a lot of the pushback against the post-World War II global architecture is coming. Is that, yes, you did build the UN, you had other ecosystems, whether it's the Bretton Woods economic ecosystems and so on and so forth. In 2020s, it's not working out anymore, right? The realities have changed. The economic power centers have changed. All said and done, you still cannot, despite the problems that China poses, you still cannot ignore its economy. It is very, very ingrained into the global economic system still. Even during India's turbulent times with China in the recent past, our trade still increased over $100 billion. So these are the new realities that the old systems are unable to keep track of. And the other reality is that the Western power construct still wants to hold on to that power that it created, right? Any big power will not like to be in a position where it is being asked that, look, you are your power is diminished, you need to give more space to the newer powers coming in. Any power will try to hold on to what they have built and what they have as far as power is concerned. And that is a pull and tug we are seeing that is taking place right now, including in the number of conflicts that are growing. You see, Afghanistan is a very good example, right? Today, the Taliban-based government there is closest to the Russians and the Chinese. And why are the Russian and the Chinese close to the Taliban? It's not as if they like them, but they just want to make sure that part of the geography remains clear of Western power, that it remains under the power of China, Russia, and others. So, the power competitions and structures are definitely exacerbating the number of conflict zones we are seeing right now.
What are the economical front, or what are the areas that global south should be concerned?
The global south should be very concerned right now, because often, in my personal opinion at least, the weight of the global south, or the unity of the global south, is overestimated. I have yet to come or yet to read anything, for example, coming from the global south that really stands in unity. They all have very divergent.
Recently, the Kazan
views.
summit, they came
Kazan
up
summit,
with
Kazan summit was one of the things. The BRICS expansion is also seen as,
also in the voice of global south, and in the month of August in India, we have seen that solidarity.
Yes, the solidarity is there. How much of that solidarity is actionable with everyone involved? That is a different thing, right? India also said in Kazan, as per some reports, that we have to make sure that BRICS does not become an anti-West ecosystem. True. Right? So there is a significant fracture of power and interest within the global south as well. The West had a much more linear take to it, right? The Americans had the power at that point of time. They built the security and power architecture and guaranteed it to the Europeans, and the Europeans thrived and survived under that. And the Americans were fine with it, because what the European decision making was going to be, the US had a very strong say in it, whether through NATO or through other ecosystems. It made sure that there was no normalization beyond a point with the Russians, for example. Right? Otherwise, the kind of energy architecture that the Russians were creating in Europe was very worrying to the Americans. Right? So that American hegemony for a long period of time kept that Western construct together. Right? Whether it's Five Eyes, whether it's any of such infrastructure, we have not seen any of those kind of things come up in the global south, because the interests are very divergent. India has very little in common with China. China has actually very little in common with South Africa. South Africa has almost nothing in common with Russia. And this is the BRICS, right? So how do all these countries come under a single viewpoint on anything? I think that is yet to be
single consensus
on anything. Yeah. I think that is yet to be seen. India had a very different take to the Israel-Gaza war to what the South Africans did. The South Africans saw it from their experience of apartheid, which is why they took Israel to the International Court of Justice. India saw it as Hamas, a terror group, attacked Israel. And that is something that comes from our experience of 26/11, Pulwama, n number of cases. So all very divergent views on one crisis. Usually in the West, at least in the past, the views were very aligned with each other. Whether they liked it or not internally is a different matter. So I think that those divergences are still very strong in the proverbial global south, and we'll have to see whether actual convergences can take shape. But I'm a little bit skeptical on that happening anytime soon.
Is there any probability of Ukraine war getting connected, or it has a spillover effect? It could be the other way around, or the Middle East war can escalate or may have a spillover effect into Ukraine?
I don't think so. There have been some uncorroborated reports about certain people who fought in Syria going to Ukraine to fight because of shortage of fighters on strength, and the Russian side specifically. But we've also seen the attacks by Islamic State Khorasan against Moscow. So they're also worried about that factor sort of coming into play, which is why the Russians support the Taliban, for example, because the Taliban fights the ISKP. So I don't think that spillover is desirable by Russia or by Ukraine. But we have seen the only spillovers per se we have seen is the Russians getting help from the Iranians on drones and drone technologies and stuff like that. But I think those two conflict zones will remain very separate conflict zones, because the realities of why they are being fought is completely different.
How do you assess the war business right now? What is the cost of the war in terms of capital?
I mean, look, I don't know. Look, it's going to significantly cost the Israelis, definitely.
Is everything calculated in dollar, or there's a de-dollarization factor?
I don't think there's a de-dollarization factor coming into
Okay.
play right now. Israel's security is guaranteed by the US, and that automatically means that the Western defense manufacturers gain from it, right? Gaza never had anything. So Gaza always has fought a very low, protracted, insurgent-based conflict, right? They have taken much more. For example, 3-4 Israeli soldiers dying is a huge thing. 3-4 Gazans dying is not a huge thing, right? Unfortunately, that's how wars work. But as far as the American presence is concerned, or the American military power is concerned, there is no other country in the world which can mobilize that the way Americans have mobilized, right? Suddenly, within a week, there are 3 aircraft carriers parked around, B-52 bombers
hovering
flying,
around the middle list,
2 squadrons of fighter jets come in, and this is all that they can spare away from the Asian theater, away from other theaters in Africa, or even just at home. This is their spare capacity. Their spare capacity is equivalent to any medium-sized country's entire military, right? So they can mobilize that. A lot of the reasons why the Iranian and Israeli escalation did not happen was because of American power being there. No one else can do that. Not the Chinese, not the Russians, no one. So in essence, this basically shows something that Dr. Jaishankar said in Washington at the Carnegie Endowment. He said that I'm not into the concept of declinism. That with the moderator kept on detailing to him that the American power is still present in the Red Sea, it's still doing against Houthis, it's still here, it's still in Taiwan, blah blah. So the declinism debate, I think, needs to be more nuanced. The American power is definitely on the downturn, but that is because domestically the Americans are a bit tired of their foreign interventions. But that does not mean that the American power per se is completely on the downslide. It is definitely protracted. It is definitely taken a step back because of political realities back home. And the fact that, the Americans are not interested in fighting the way they did in Iraq or in Afghanistan. 30 years you're there, you spent $3 trillion with no result. So it's more of a domestic requirement. The American people saying this whole idea of Pax Americana is not something we are interested in anymore, and the American politicians have to listen. That's where Trump comes in, for example. He said that what are we doing outside so many times. So people agree to it. People are like, yeah, why are we doing that? Look, our infrastructure is in crumbles, but why is spending $3 trillion outside? So, but one thing that the Americans have shown that in the Middle East right now, their security umbrella is still very, very important, which is why countries like Saudi Arabia are still looking to cut a security deal with them. Despite, promoting strategic autonomy, promoting that, we will talk with the Russians also, we will do business with the Chinese also. But they still seek the security guarantees, they still seek from the Americans.
So Israel is completely dependent on the American support, or do you think they also have got adequate number of support from the other emerging nations and the
No, I think the two things that Israel is reliant on is first its own capacity, especially technology capacities, which are excellent, which are immense, as the world knows. Yeah, as the world knows. But the second is a unbridled support from the Americans, right? The US sees Israel as its first state of support outside the US. So whether it's a Republican candidate or whether it's a Democrat candidate, that military support to the US, to Israel, is not going to be challenged beyond a point.
Thank you, Kavir,
Thank
for
you so
joining
much.
on
Thank you.
COGS and explaining the developing situation emanating from
Thank you.
Middle East.
Thank you so
Kavir.
much. Thank you.